Every day you make hundreds of excuses about why you can't do something and why you can't achieve this and why you can't achieve that. And some of them are really sneaky, some of them are really subtle. So we're going to go over some of them here and hopefully help you guys out. So excuses are a tricky thing. There's obvious ones, like let's say you want to go to the gym and you want to start a new gym routine. You might say, oh, I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow because it's raining outside and I can't go because if I go, I'll get wet on the way to the gym and then I might catch a cold and then I'll miss work. So I'll go tomorrow when it's not raining. That's kind of a obvious, hard excuse that hopefully you can see the self-deception that's going on there. But there's much more subtle versions of this, and we're going to talk about some of them here. So, what are things that people most commonly make excuses for? Well, we've already talked about them: leading a healthy lifestyle, going to the gym, eating healthy, eating whole foods, not eating junk food, not eating processed foods. These are basic things you can do to feel great on a daily basis, but your mind's going to play lots of tricks on you and make lots of excuses for you. There's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and he talks a lot about, the whole book is basically a deep dive into the two systems of the brain. So he calls them System 1 and 2. And System 1 is the instinctive response, the primal brain, and System 2 is the slow thinking, conscious brain. And he cites many studies in this book that refer to people being put in situations where they have to tax themselves cognitively. So they actually have to put a lot of thought into things. And the conclusion is most people don't want to do this. Most people are no more keen to tax themselves cognitively than they are to tax themselves physically. So going to the gym is hard. It's a lot of effort, especially if you want to train hard. And so is thinking. And so what do most people do? They don't think. They don't think deeply. So when they gave people situations where they kind of gave them trick questions, so they said, this thing costs this much, how much more is it than this other thing? And the answer seemed obvious because in one example they had one item that cost $1 and the other one cost $1.10. And they kind of said, how much more does it cost? And some of the respondents said 10 cents, just because they were only given a few seconds. So they kind of just looked at the number on the right of that decimal there and just decided to go with that one. And they found that the people who spent more time and double checked or triple checked their answers actually had much better results in other tests, other cognitive tests. So the point here is that our brains do tend to default to the path of least resistance. They tend to take the easiest route and take the easy option. And if you notice, what you're probably doing in your own life is you're not just doing this cognitively, you're not just taking the easy path in terms of thinking or in terms of going to the gym, but you're doing it in lots of areas in your life. You're taking the easy path in so many areas that it's completely limiting you. And so I want to give you an example, or a couple of examples here. So we talked about the gym, but there's also other subtle excuses that go on, especially when it comes to learning. So if you want to experience growth in your life and you want to grow as much as you can and actualize your full potential, you're going to have to spend a lot of time learning. But if you remember what we just talked about, learning requires that system 2 kind of thinking. It's very hard. It requires a lot of mental effort and a lot of mental strain. And often it's not fun. Often there's a lot of grind involved. It can be boring, especially when you first get into something and you're learning a lot of theory. You have to just sit and read textbooks, and it's not as fun as doing the thing that you want to do maybe, but it's something you have to do. And this is where your brain's really going to try and procrastinate and just do anything it can to distract you. So, for example, if you want to study for an exam or study to qualify in some kind of skill, what you're probably going to find is instead, especially when it comes up to the time where you actually have to do that study, you're going to have lots of urges. You're going to have urges to go and play video games, to go and eat some fast food or some chips or something, or watch some porn, something that's quick and easy and gives you an instant dopamine release and doesn't require that mental effort. And what you find is if you take enough of those distractions on, if you agree to that other part of your brain, also known as the chimp brain, that's another great book, The Chimp Paradox. So if you give in to that chimp side of your brain, then you're going to find that your willpower is exhausted. So another thing that they found in these studies that we were talking about from the Thinking Fast and Slow research was that willpower is limited. So you have a certain amount each day, and if you burn through it, then you burn through it, and you're going to give in to temptations much more easily. So if people are given very demanding tasks, very mentally tiring and draining tasks, they'll actually be much more likely to give in to temptation. So if you offer someone who's in the middle of a demanding task an apple or a fruit salad and a piece of chocolate cake, they're much more likely to go for the piece of chocolate cake versus someone who's at rest, relaxing, or just doing an easy task. So this is a limited resource, and you need to make sure that you use it wisely. And so if you're using it all up, trying to overcome these small urges to procrastinate and to make excuses, then you're not actually going to have the willpower left. That willpower reserve is going to be empty for you to actually perform your study or whatever it is you want to learn. So I experienced this in my own life. I had a really terrible fear of flying. I didn't fly for many years. It started when I was about 16, and I kind of forced myself to do it. But then in my mid-20s, I took about 3 years off of flying and going on holidays or going abroad anywhere because I couldn't deal with the stress. It was just too stressful, the whole experience. And then when I did go back to flying, I would drink a couple of alcoholic drinks and take some tablets which were prescribed to me by a doctor to kind of provide a sedative effect. And what I decided to do in an extreme turn of events is actually learn to fly. And I wanted to get a pilot's license, so I went and took a flying lesson. And I remember the first lesson very clearly. It was one of the most uncomfortable things I've done. It was terrifying for me. And when we came back down, I kind of said to the instructor, I enjoyed it, but that may be the only one. I've kind of faced my fear by coming here and doing a flying lesson, and I was proud of myself for doing that. But I forced myself to do a second and a third one. And each time it did get slightly easier. And then I bought a book, a textbook, and I went through it. You have to take a number of theory exams to get your pilot's license. So I decided if I could pass the theory exams, then I knew I could go ahead and do the rest of the lessons and do the practical test at the end. And so I really struggled to go through that theory book because my brain was not only telling me it wasn't a fun thing to sit and study for hours on end, but it was also telling me if you do go through this, you're gonna have to then push through and actually do more flying lessons and eventually fly a plane by yourself. So anyway, I pushed through, and that was just over a year ago, and I got my license back in May this year, so 6 months ago, and I fell in love with it, and now I fly regularly. I take friends and family up on flights. I go flying by myself. I love flying now. I have a share in a plane with some other people, and it's become a passion of mine. And this is the thing: if you study something deeply enough, I believe you can become passionate about pretty much anything. You can kind of force yourself into being passionate about something because everything's interesting if you know enough about it. So there was lots of times when I was doing that where I wanted to procrastinate, where I wanted to make excuses about why I couldn't go. I remember spending many, many hours looking up aviation statistics and reading about how dangerous general aviation is in comparison to commercial aviation. because the accident rates are much higher. I mean, commercial aviation is one of the safest things you can do is get on a commercial jet. But that can't really be said for light aircraft, especially for inexperienced pilots like myself who only have a handful of hours under their belt and just do it recreationally. The statistics are much higher in terms of accident rates. And I remember using that as an excuse for a long time about why I wouldn't even start the lessons. This was before I took the first one. I was like, well, it's not worth it. The risk is too high. But then as I've become more experienced and I learnt more about it, I realised that the statistics are not representative on an individual level. They never are. So if you have an accident rate of, say, 1 in 100,000, which is the current average for general aviation, so for every 100,000 hours flown, there's one fatality. But it is an average, and a lot of those include one of the leading causes is people flying into bad weather, into cloud, or flying aircraft that they're inexperienced in without someone with them. Another common cause of accidents is stalling in the circuit. So these kind of things I became very aware of, and because I'm so hyper aware of it and was such a nervous flyer beforehand, I kind of still identify myself as a nervous pilot. I am very careful. I check everything very thoroughly beforehand, and I would hasten to say, without complacency setting in, that my predicted accident rate would hopefully be much lower than the average of 1 in 100,000, because I'm very aware of those things and would be careful not to put myself in those situations. Now, that's not to say that I'm immune, because that kind of thinking is just as dangerous as someone who's reckless. So it's just an example for you there about how it is possible to overcome even quite severe excuse making. Shortly after I got my pilot's license, I decided I was going to take it a step further and do a skydive, which even as a pilot at the time I found terrifying. And when we were up in the plane and I had the instructor strapped to my back, I kind of said to him, I'm not sure I can do this. And he very kindly just went ahead and pushed me out of the plane, which I really appreciate, because I don't know if I could have done that by myself. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been in that situation. But the point here is you just need to jump in and do things. And that's kind of the flip side of all of this. Instead of making excuses and procrastinating, you need to become a person of action. People of action are such a small percentage of the population. People often cite 1%ers, but a person of action, in my opinion, is a 0.1%er. They're so rare. And I've had so many people come up to me in my life and ask me about different things that I've been working on. A classic example is software development. So I've been a professional software developer for just almost 10 years now. And I've had, in the last year alone, I've had 5 people come up to me and say, people outside of the industry, and say they would like to be software developers. They would like to learn how to be a software developer and enter the career path. And I always tell people the same thing. Anyone can do it, because I did it without any formal training. I taught myself. I didn't do computer science or any engineering degrees at university. So I know it's possible. And so I kind of always start off by giving people that encouragement and giving them as much support as I can. Out of those 5 people, none of them went past the tutorial stage. So most of the people ended up doing 2 to 3 weeks of tutorials online, which you can do for free. And it's a good starting point. It's what I started with, and it's what I recommended they do. But none of them pursued it any further than that. Now, that's not to say necessarily that they should have, because maybe they found it wasn't right for them, and you don't need to necessarily stick to things that aren't good for you. But I have noticed a pattern of people asking me about various things. That's one example. There have been other instances of other hobbies or endeavors, let's say. An example is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've had many people ask me over the years about training Jiu-Jitsu, and if they can come to a class or if they could start. And these people, you never see them, or they'll come for one and you'll never see them again. So generally speaking, people aren't people of action. They're procrastinators and they're excuse makers, and they don't stick to things and they don't do things, especially when they realize how much work it is. Um, there's a law known as the law of diminishing intent, and it's one I always bear in mind because I've been susceptible to it in the past too. The law of diminishing intent basically means when you start something, you're very, very enthusiastic about it. It's a new project, it's a new endeavor, you're really excited about it. However, over time, the more time that passes, the more that enthusiasm diminishes. And the people who succeed at things are the people that are consistent, even when that intent is greatly diminished. And trust me, there have been times when I've been writing code, there have been times when I've been training jiu-jitsu, there have been times when I was undergoing my flight school training. All of these things, there was many times where my intent was greatly diminished. I didn't want to do it anymore, or at least I didn't want to do it that day. I've wanted to quit jiu-jitsu many, many times, especially after losing at a competition, for example, or just having a bad training session. But the people who succeed are the people that are consistent in the face of that adversity and in the face of your brain, your second part of your brain telling you, let's not do this anymore, let's go and do something more comfortable. So one of the best kind of rules that sums all of this up is always doing the thing that makes you feel uncomfortable. If you're thinking of doing something and your brain's kind of telling you, I don't know about that, it's probably a sign you should go ahead and do it. Now, that's not to say we want to be reckless. There's still definitely a place for planning and making sure you're doing the right thing, but don't overthink. Pick an option and go for it and be a person of action. Another example of this, there's a great book I just finished reading actually called Don't Trust Your Gut. And this statistic really surprised me. I have been on quite a few dates via dating apps before, so I'm very used to the process and how it goes and the kind of what you can expect in terms of response rates and that kind of thing. And this still shocked me. So they did a study with one of the big dating apps, and what they wanted to see is what was the response rate when there was a massive difference in perceived attractiveness of the people. And so they got and again, this was as judged by other people, so this is not objective, this is obviously subjective. They got the people with the subjectively least attractive physical appearance, men, in the bottom 10% of attractiveness as judged by other women, and they investigated what the response rate was from women who were in the top 10%. So what this comes down to is not very physically attractive men messaging women who were in the top 10% of attractiveness. 9 or 10 out of 10 women, very attractive. And the average response rate, I want you to guess now what you think it might be as a percentage. So if I'm a 1 out of 10 man in terms of attractiveness and I message a 10 out of 10 female on a dating app, what can I expect? If I message 100 of them, how many responses can I expect? Well, if you're like me, I was expecting it to be maybe 1 or 2, if you're lucky, 1 to 2%. Well, the actual response rate was 14%. And if you inverse the genders, so you take the women who were at the bottom of the attractiveness scale as judged in the study versus the most attractive men, it was around double that. So around 30% of the most attractive men would still respond to women in that tier. And the response rate for people that were actually average was much higher. So people that scored on average levels of attractiveness, so average men that were messaging women in the top percent, they received a response rate of around 40 to 50%. So it was much higher. So what is this? Why am I talking about this? Well, think about it. If you've drawn the completely worst card genetically and you consider yourself to be, and this is a very small minority of people, it's less than 10%, but let's say you do consider yourself in that less than 10% in terms of physical attractiveness. And for some reason, you want to date someone who's in the top 10 percentile, which there's no real reason to want that because attractiveness in a partner doesn't actually affect your happiness at all. But let's say for some reason that's your goal, a short-term goal. If you're getting a 14% response rate, well, that means if you message, sorry, it's a distracting sound outside. If you message 10 people, you're going to get a response there. And if you message 20 of them, you're going to get a couple of responses. Now, if out of every 2 to 3 people you talk to and get a response from, you can go on a date, then that means 20 or 30 different people you're messaging, you're going to get a date. Now, the point in this is most people don't do it. Most people don't take action. They don't do these kind of things. They don't push forward. And I've actually seen this firsthand from a female perspective. So a female friend of mine who I used to be quite close with, we were kind of drinking one night, and she wanted to see if she could agree to get a random guy to sleep with her. And the reason this came about is because I was kind of saying to her, well, as a female, it's much easier. I mean, you could go on any of these apps, Tinder, whatever, you could go on there as a female and probably, within an hour, if you're a female, get some guy to meet you. And she didn't agree with me, so she's like, okay, I'm gonna try this. I'm not sure if she was actually gonna go through and meet them, but anyway. So what happened was she was showing me her phone. She matched with a whole bunch of guys. She set up a brand new account and had some photos, and she set up some nice pictures, and she had a whole bunch of matches really quickly, as expected. So that's exactly what I expected. That a female that joins a dating app is going to get many matches much more quickly. So she did this, and then she messaged a bunch of them, and I was shocked to see the response. Now, this is someone who is attractive. I don't know what percentile you would put her in. It doesn't matter, but she's up there in attractiveness. And she didn't get the response rate I was expecting. So only around half the people that she messaged, I would say, around half of them responded. And then the ones that did respond, I was like, okay, well, these, when she explains what she's willing to do, I mean, they're gonna jump on the chance because it's such a rare, other than like scammers or something, this is such a rare scenario. So she did that. She actually messaged some of them and said, look, I'm just looking to hook up with someone tonight. I'm here. She matched in the same city. She could see they were like a mile away or whatever, a few miles away. Do you want to meet up? And I could not believe how difficult it was for her to actually get anyone to take any real action. So she had some people that agreed to it, and then when it actually came down to it, I remember one guy in particular. He was kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna come and meet you, and they named a bar and everything, and then he messaged her, and this was on her phone. She'd given him her number, and he kind of said, oh well, I've got issues with my car, and my friend's gonna give me a ride into town instead. And then he messaged again and said, oh, I just need to go and see another friend to borrow some money because I don't actually have money to come out and go drinking tonight, before whatever. So it was just crazy. And then there was other people. I remember there was one guy who kind of skipped all of that. He said, oh, you can come around my house or whatever. And she's like, well, I'll meet you in a public place and then we can do that. And then he was like, oh, it's kind of a long walk from my house. I mean, to me, this summed up exactly the lack of action that most people are willing to take. These are people that had matched up, that clearly wanted this outcome. They wanted to meet her, they wanted to sleep with her. But some part of their brain was telling them no. It was telling them that they were too nervous, that something might go wrong. It might not be a real person. It might be a scammer. Even though she'd done videos and stuff to prove it was her, but still could have been a scammer. But they were agreeing to meet in public and this kind of thing, and the action there was very, very low in terms of response rate, and that was with an attractive female throwing herself at men. So if you're one of the people that take action in dating or in business or in whatever endeavor you want to do, you're going to be in such a small percentile of people, such a small percentage of people. You're going to be in an elite group there that you're just bound to thrive. You have to become a person of action, and if you do that, you'll be certainly in the top 1%, but probably in the top 0.1% of people in terms of the results that you get in your life. So this really is a hack. If you can overcome this excuse making and this procrastination, and just stop distracting yourself from the things that you really want to do, you're going to become elite at whatever it is you decide to do. You need to also make sure that your language is in alignment with this. So I'm going to make an episode in the future about clarity and how to be clear in your speech and in your thinking. But just to kind of give you a couple of pointers before that, you need to remove things like I might or maybe. Those are key words that you're going to see from the other 99.9% of the population when it comes to committing to things and to actually doing things. The thing that they're often going to say is maybe, yeah, I might do that. I might do it if if the weather's good, or if I'm feeling like it that day. Yeah, I might do that. Or this weekend I really want to be a developer, or I really want to be a doctor, so I'm going to focus on that career path. So this weekend I might read a book about it, and I might do something towards that. If that's the kind of language you're using, then you may as well say I'm never going to do it, because that's what it means. So make sure your language aligns with this, and that you actually embody this as a person. So in your speaking, in your thinking, everything is aligned with being a person of action. If you do this, you're going to see massive, massive results, even if sometimes you take the wrong action. So sometimes you don't do the perfect thing because you're being a person of action and you're just committing to things and doing them. And sometimes it's not going to be the right thing, but a person of action who makes the wrong choice every now and again is still going to see far, far superior results to the person who doesn't do anything. It's like the great quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, is so true. It's so true. So you really have to just do this, focus on it, be a person of action. If you're watching this right now and you have something to do, and you're just watching a video to learn more and to increase your personal development, that's great. But make sure this is the last video you watch until you've done that thing. So turn the video off right now, go and do whatever it is you need to do, be a person of action, and make some change in your life. I'll see you next time.